All right, let's talk about something we use every single day. We work for it, we spend it, we save it. But have you ever stopped to think about what money actually is? It seems so simple, but the real answer is, honestly, this incredible story that weaves through history, economics, and even our brains work. So in this explainer, we're going to pull back that curtain and really figure out what money is all about. So let me kick things off with a kind of weird question for you. What could cigarettes possibly have in common with seashells? I know, it sounds like the start of a bad joke, but stick with me here because the answer to that question gets to the very heart of what makes money, well, money. We'll get back to it, I promise. To really get why we even invented money in the first place, we have to go back in time. We need to imagine a world that ran entirely on a system called bartering. Now, bartering is pretty simple, right? You've got something I need, I've got something you need, so we just swap. A farmer could trade a bag of potatoes to a blacksmith for a new shovel. It's direct, it makes sense, but it has one massive, economy-killing flaw. And that huge flaw has this clunky name, the double coincidence of wants. But think about what that actually means. Let's say you're a baker and you need a new pair of shoes. It's not enough to just find a shoemaker. No, you have to find a shoemaker who just so happens to want a loaf of bread right at that very moment. If he doesn't, no trade. Your whole economy just grinds to a halt. So here's the bottom line. Bartering is just wildly inefficient. You spend way more time trying to find someone to trade with than you do actually producing stuff. Money is the brilliant solution to this. It's like a middleman that everyone agrees to accept. You can sell your bread to anyone for money, and then you take that money and buy shoes from whoever you want, whether they're hungry for bread or not. Problem solved. Okay, so we've got to invent something to fix this whole bartering mess. But what should we use? A banana? Some big old rock? Well, it turns out that for something to work well as money, it has to have a very specific set of qualities. And here they are, the 5 must-haves. First, it's got to be fungible. That just means any one of them is the same as another. A dollar's a dollar, right? Second, it needs to be durable. It can't rot or fall apart. Third, it's got to be portable, easy to carry around. Fourth, it has to be recognizable, so everyone can tell it's the real deal. And finally, and this is a big one, its value has to be pretty stable. And that brings us all the way back to our first question about cigarettes and seashells. This story about cigarettes in POW camps is just a perfect illustration of how anything can become money if it ticks those 5 boxes. In those camps, cigarettes just worked. They were all the same, they lasted, you could carry them, everyone knew what they were, and the supply was limited enough to keep their value steady. Even guys who didn't smoke would accept them as payment because they knew they could turn around and trade them later for something they did want. So now we know what makes something good money. But what are the actual jobs it does for us in an economy? Well, turns out it wears 3 main hats. First up, and this is the big one, it's a medium of exchange. That's the whole reason we invented it, to solve that barter problem. Then it's a unit of account. This just means it gives us a common ruler to measure value. We can price a car in dollars instead of some crazy ratio of, chickens and loaves of bread. And third, it's a store of value. You can hang on to it and it's still going to be worth something tomorrow or next year. It lets you save up. And because it's a pretty reliable store of value, that unlocks a fourth, super important function. It lets us set a standard for payments in the future. And that is what makes our entire system of credit and debt, borrowing money, lending money, even possible. So we've talked about why we have money and what it does. Now let's take a look at how it's changed over the years, because it's a pretty wild ride. The story of money is really a story of it becoming more and more abstract. We started with commodity money. Actual stuff that had its own value, like grain or, those seashells from the beginning. Then we shifted to precious metals like gold and silver, which were a lot easier to deal with. From there, we took a giant leap of faith to paper notes or fiat money, which have 0 value on their own. And today, let's be real, most of our money is just numbers on a screen, just electronic records. And that brings us to a really, really important idea, the difference between hard money and what we call softs or fiat money. Hard money, like when we were on the gold standard, is backed by a real physical thing. Its supply is limited. But fiat money, which is what pretty much everyone uses today, is only backed by your trust and faith in the government that printed it. That's it. And that means its supply can change, giving central banks a massive tool to steer the economy. So just how much can that supply change? Well, take a look at this number. That's the M1 money supply in the US as of August 2023. We're talking all the cash and checking accounts out there. It's just a mind-boggling amount of money. But what's wild is that just a little over a year before that, the same number was over $20 trillion. It just shows you the massive scale and, the flexibility of the money we use today. So this whole journey, from shells to gold to numbers on a server, it brings us right up to the present day, to the very latest chapter in the story of money. And this one's still being written. So, enter cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. These are a totally new breed. They're all digital, and this is the key part, they aren't issued or controlled by a central bank or a government. They're decentralized. And if you think back to our checklist, they definitely tick some of those boxes for what makes good money, but maybe not all of them. And that is the million-dollar question, or maybe the million Bitcoin question. Is cryptocurrency really money? Well, based on the source material, while people do use it for some things, and a lot of people see it as an investment, it really struggles with that whole stable store of value thing. I mean, you've probably seen the headlines about the wild price swings, right? So in the US, for example, it's officially treated as property you have to pay taxes on, like a stock, not as legal money you can pay your taxes with. And that kind of brings us to our final thought here. When you look at the big picture, the history of money shows us one thing for sure. It's always changing. What we call money is really just a technology, a social agreement that we all buy into. So the real question isn't just about